Shalom, shalom, shalom. All praises to Yahweh Shah. As we've been commanded to come out here on these highways and hedges to bid our people to the marriage, particularly and only Israel, right? Before we start this presentation, I want to face to the east where our country of Jerusalem is and give all honor, all glory, all praises to Yahweh Shah, to the elect of Israel, right? So this presentation is regarding 1 Corinthians 11 and 4. When Paul is edifying in terms of giving perspective on the covering of your head, in terms of men covering their head when they pray or prophesy, right? So, what was Paul talking about? You know what I'm saying? In that 1 Corinthians 11 and 4, praying or prophesying with your head covered dishonoreth his head, right? So, first of all, we got to get some understanding here, right? So we got to understand that Paul was in Corinth. Now remember, Corinth, the Corinthians, the Ephesians, Galatians, those guys, were just completely, defiled, with the Greek tradition. Our people had embraced the Greek custom, so tough, that they were just completely, just overtaken and overwhelmed with that, okay? In terms of implementing that, in our daily or their daily lives, okay? So we got to understand that first and foremost. So there's a term for that. It's called Hellenistic or Hellenized, right? And so what that means is, it means made of Greek in form or character, right? So you're going to see that the New Testament was written in Greek, right? So we got to understand, when it's written in Greek, we got a problem off the rip. We got a problem already, because we're going to see something. So here, let's go over to the book of Sirach and the prologue of Sirach, because Sirach warned us of these different, linguistics or different languages, right? So this is Sirach, the prologue, right? Let's get it. Okay. Slakia. Here it is. It says, "Wherefore let me entreat you to read it with favor and attention, and to pardon us wherein we may seem to come short of some words, which we have labored to interpret. For the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And not only these things, but the law itself and the prophets and the rest of the books have no small difference when they are spoken in their own language." So we see, that we're being warned of these different languages, because you're going to have different interpretations and different understandings in these different languages, right? And again, as we mentioned earlier, the New Testament is written in Greek, all right? So we got to be careful with that. So let's go over and take a look at that. Let's go over to 1 Corinthians 11 and 4 and see exactly what Paul is talking about. And remember, this thing is written in Greek, so we already have a problem. Okay? Right? So this is 1 Corinthians 11 and 4. It says, "Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered," right? "Dishonoreth his head." So the operative word here is covered, right? Okay? So when we go to the Greek interpretation of the word covered, it's going to be kita, K-A-T-A. It's going to be G 2596, and it means throughout, right? So in other words, it's saying all of this, covered, including your crown, right, of your head. Because remember, your crown, this is your antenna right here, right? This is how we transmit, right? So we can't cover this, right? And even the priests, when you saw that they wore the matri, you know what I'm saying? The turban, the diadems, even with the turbans, they had like a small little hole up there. You know what I'm saying? They never covered completely like that, right? So again, let's see what Paul is talking about, because we got to understand, you know what I'm saying, those times, right? And remember, you know what I'm saying, our people were completely embraced in Greek fashion and Greek custom. So we got to understand that first and foremost, okay? So let's go to the book of Maccabees 1. You got to understand this, Israel. Let's go to 1 Maccabees chapter 1, and we're going to pick it up at verse 11. Watch this, y'all. It says, in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, see that? Who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. So we see this off the rip. So just like, these so-called leaders, right, who aren't leaders at all, you know what I'm saying, are tripping up the people. So, there's nothing new under the sun. We see that the same thing was happening back then, okay, right? 14, it says, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the custom of the heathen. Watch this. 15, it says, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to mischief. So this is what Paul is addressing. Paul is addressing this problem of the men, right, having their head completely covered, right? Covered, you know what I'm saying? Doing prayer or prophesying. So we see that, right? So now let's go over to the book of, Second Maccabees and see, exactly what Paul is talking about. So this is what Paul is addressing, in terms of our men, again, you know what I'm saying, having their head covered, you know what I'm saying, when prophesying and praying, right? And that covered would be the entire head here and the crown. Now remember, our custom, we could wear like a band, around our head, which is called like a headband or a sweatband or something like that. We could wear those, you know what I'm saying? However, I don't see in scripture where you see Yahweh or any other prophets wearing those things during a prayer or prophesying. So if you guys notice, I don't have mine on now, right? Used to wear like a band that goes here. So I'm not sure until, I pray Yahweh gives me the proper understanding on that. So, let Yahweh be true and everybody a lie. So I'd rather err on the right side, you know what I'm saying, and let Yahweh be true and every man a liar, okay? So, and remember, the mitri, the diadem, and the turban, you know what I'm saying, and the bonnets, those were priestly garments, right? So only the Levitical priesthood, those guys could only wear those. The mitri, the diadem, the turban, you know what I'm saying, and the bonnet, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, you know what I'm saying, our custom, we did wear, the band, but we had this open, okay? So now let's go and see what Paul is addressing here. Let's go to 2 Maccabees. Let's go to 2 Maccabees chapter 4 and see what the problem is, okay? 2 Maccabees chapter 4 from the top, it says, this Simon now, so now who is this Simon? Who is this guy? Who is Simon? Who is this? Who is this Simon, all right? So let's go see who this Simon is. Let's go back one chapter in 2 Maccabees chapter 3 and 4 and 11 to see what the Simon is. Right? Second Maccabees 3 and 4 says, but one Simon of the tribe of Benjamin. So we see that this Simon, he's not even a Levite. He's of the tribe of Benjamin, right? Who had made governor, it's like who was made governor of the temple, fell out with the high priest about a disorder in the city. Okay, let's jump down to verse. Where's that rascal at? Let's jump down to verse 11. It says, and that some of it belonged to Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man of great dignity, and not as that wicked Simon had misinformed. The sum whereof in all was 400 talents of silver and 200 talents of gold. So we see that off the rip, this Simon, right, he's a Benjamite, and the dude is wicked. And so he has involvement, you know what I'm saying, in the temple there. Okay, so we see who this guy is. Let's go back over to 2 Maccabees 4 and pick it up at from the top. It says, this Simon now, of whom we spake afore, right, we just read that, having been a betrayer of the money. So this guy's wicked, as we just read that earlier, Simon, and of his countrymen, slandered Onias, as if he had terrified Helidortrus, and been the worker of these evils. So let's see who the Onias is. So we saw who Simon is. Now we got to see who Onias is, right? So let's see who Onias is. Slakia. Let's get him. Let's go back to 2 Maccabees chapter 3 again and see who this Onias is, right? Okay, it says 2 Maccabees 3 and 1, it says, now when the holy city was inhabited with all peace, and the laws were kept very well because of the godliness of Onias the high priest, and his hatred of wickedness. So we see that Onias was a righteous dude. He was a righteous Levite, who had the ability, to lead the holy congregation as a Levite. Because remember, Yahweh only gave that office, to the Levites. Okay, so now we see both who both of these guys are. Again, this is what Paul is addressing, right? Over in 1 Corinthians 4 and 11. Okay, let's go back over to 2 Maccabees 4. Pick it up at verse 2. It says, thus was he bold to call him a traitor, right? That had deserved well of the city, and tendered his own nation, and was so zealous of the laws. So we see that righteous Onias, right, is calling Simon, who's a Benjamite, a traitor, right? It says, but when their hatred was so far that by one of Simon's factions, murders were committed. So these dudes had started to, blow people down. You know what I'm saying? And commit murder. This Simon dude, wicked, right? For it says, Onias seeing the danger of this contention, and that Apollyon, as being the governor of Seleucia and Phoenice, did rage and increase Simon's malice. He went to the king not to be an accuser of his countrymen, but to seek the good of all, both public and private. So Onias goes to the king and says, hey man, this wicked dude, Simon, and his people with him are wicked, right? 6. It says, for he saw that it was impossible that the state should continue quiet, and Simon leave his folly. See that? Unless the king did look into it. But after the death of Seleucus, when Antiochus called Epiphanes, took the kingdom, Jason, right? Who is this Jason guy? We'll see a little later who this Jason is. Wicked dude, Jason. right? We'll see who Jason is, right? Jason, right, the brother of Onias. So we see that Jason is the brother of righteous Onias, right? The high priest, right? Labored underhand to be high priest. So this Jason, he wants to usurp the power of his righteous brother and become high priest. So we can implement all types of different wicked legislation according to the our customs and our laws against Yahweh Ba'asham Hamshah. Now we got to bring this out, right? So we can understand exactly what Paul is referring to. What is Paul addressing in 1 Corinthians 11 and 4? We got to bring this out, okay? 8, it says, promising unto the king by intercession 300 and 80 talents of silver, and of another revenue 80 talents. So this guy, Jason, is wanting to bribe the king. Besides this, he promised to assign 150 more if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise and for the training up of youth in the fashion of the heathen. See that? Look at that. So these our wicked forefathers wanted to leave our customs of Yahweh Ba'asham, Yahweh Shai, and start employing heathenistic practices. Right? It says, read that again. 9, it says, besides this, he promised to assign 150 more if he might have license to set him up a place of exercise and for the training up of youth in the fashion of the heathen. Look at this. And to write them of Jerusalem by the name of Antiochians. Look at this. So this wicked devil, our forefather, wanted to even change our names from being Yasharala to Antiochians, or whatever the heck that is. I don't know what that is. In our language, no doggone way. So we see how wicked our forefathers were. Okay? 10, it says, when the king had granted, and he had gotten into his hands the rule, he forthwith brought his own nation to Greek fashion. So Jason was able to, wickedly influence, our customs in terms of our practice, in the priesthood. 11, it says, and the royal privileges granted of special favor to the Jews by the means of John, the father of Eupolemus, who went ambassador to Rome for enmity and aid, he took away, and putting down the governments which were according to the law. Look at that. He brought up new customs against the law. All right? So we see this going on, right? So our wicked ancestors are going against the law, right? Look at 12, it says, for he built gladly a place of exercise under the tower itself, and brought the chief young men under his subjection, and made them wear hats. Here it is right here, 12. So this is what Paul is talking about over in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and 4. The wearing of a hat, the whole cover here. That's what Paul is talking about. He's not talking about, like a Mitri, style headgear. He's not talking about that. These are literal hats of all your crown and all that being covered, right? That's what Paul is addressing here, right? Let's fix this thing up. It says, now, 13, it says, now such was the height of Greek fashion, and increased, see that, of heathenistic manners, through the exceeding profaneness of Jason, that ungodly wretch, and no high priest, that the priest had no courage to serve anymore at the altar, right? They had, right, the righteous priest, but despising the temple and neglecting the sacrifices, hastened to be partakers of the unlawful allowance in the place of exercise after the game of disca called them forth. So we see, all these unrighteous decrees being implemented, in our culture. This is what it's talking about. So this is what Paul is addressing, right? In 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and 4. Because remember, we were just so influenced, and had developed and embraced this heathen custom, just like here in this place. You know what I'm saying? In America, which is Mystery Babylon. There's nothing new under the sun. So this is what Paul is addressing. He's not talking about a band here. There's nothing wrong with wearing a band here, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, we got to find more scriptures, right? To see if our forefathers were actually praying or prophesying with like a band on, right? Okay? Or a mitre, or some sort of headgear like that, right? So this is what Paul is addressing. 15, it says, not setting by the honors of their fathers, but likening the glory of the Grecians best of all. Look at that. By reason whereof sore calamity came upon them, for they had them to be their enemies and avengers, whose customs they follow so earnestly. Look at this, y'all. Wearing a hat and head covering, doing prayer and prophesying. Right? Okay, let me see. Slacky about that. It says, and unto whom they desire to be like in all things. See that? All things. So they were wanting to be just like, those heathens round about them. With the wearing of the hats. With their head completely covered when praying and prophesying. 17, it says, for it is not a light thing to do wickedly against the laws of Yahweh Ba'ashai and Yahweh Shai, but the time following shall declare these things. Now when the game that was used every faith year was kept at Tyrus, the king being represented, this ungracious Jason sent special messengers from Jerusalem, who were Antiochians, to carry 300 drachms of silver to the sacrifice of Hercules, which even the bearers thereof thought fit not to bestow upon the sacrifice, because it was not convenient, but to be reserved of, it's like it says, but to be reserved for other charges. It says, this money then, in regard of the sender, was appointed to Hercules' sacrifice, but because of the bearers thereof, it was employed to the making of galleys. So we see the wickedness, of our forefathers. And so this is what Paul is addressing. All of the customs that we had embraced, that we had embraced, right? Let's get 22. It says, where he was honorably received of Jason and of the city, and was brought in by torch a light, and with great shouting, and so after went, it's like it said, and so afterward went with him his host unto Phoenice. 3 years after, Jason sent Menelaus, the aforesaid Simon's brother, to bear the money of the king, and to put him in mind of certain necessary matters. But he, being brought to the presence of the king, when he had magnified him for the gracious It's like for the glorious appearance of his power, got the priesthood to himself. Look at his wickedness. Offered more than Jason by 300 talents of silver. So even Jason, you know what I'm saying, you know, he got kicked to the curb. Right? 45, it says, so he came with the king's mandate, bringing nothing worthy. It's like it says, bringing nothing worthy the high priest, but having the fury of a cruel tyrant and the rage of a savage beast. So we see what's going on here. We see, you know what I'm saying, that the priesthood is being bombarded by these wicked men, right? Who made us wear hats, which is what Paul was referring to in 1 Corinthians 11 and 4. 26, it says, then Jason, who had undermined his own brother, being undermined by another, was compelled to flee into the country of the Ammonites. So Manasseh, whatever his name is, got the principality, but as for the money that he had promised unto the king, he took no good order for it, albeit so Trias, the ruler of the castle, required it. Right, so we see the wickedness, man. So now we got this dude right here, this Menelaus. This dude is has oversight, you know what I'm saying, over the priesthood. Wicked as heck. See what I'm saying? Wicked as heck. So now we understand what Paul is addressing. Let's go to 36. It says, and when the king was come again from the place of Caesarea, the Jews that were in the city and certain of the Greeks that abhorred the fact also complained because Onus, righteous Onus, was slain without cause. So they killed Onus, the high priest. So they killed Onus, the high priest, you know, and usurped his title as high priest and start implementing, you know what I'm saying, all these wicked rules into our custom. That's what Paul is addressing here, okay? That's what he's addressing, right? So, you know, and the problem, here's another problem, is people are, some people are using the Geneva Bible, right? So we know that the Geneva Bible was created, you know what I'm saying, you know, in 1516. Slovakia in 1560. It was also revised in 1599. That's where you got the Texas Receptus Bible comes out of that. But the problem is, even in the first edition, right? And we know that the Neva Bible, you know what I'm saying? I'm not sure, but these it was some English guys, you know what I'm saying, who had escaped persecution from England and went down to Switzerland to write this. I'm not sure, you know, if those are Edomites, you know, if those are our countrymen according to the flesh, I don't know, right? But the problem is with that Geneva, Switzerland Bible, both the original of 1560 and the revision in 1599, which is the Texas Receptus, it has the word anything. So it would read like this. Let me get that. And so people are kind of leaning on that a little bit in terms of the Geneva Bible. So the Geneva Bible, both of them, the 1560 and the Texas Receptus, right, that was revised in 1599, is reading like this. So it reads like, it says, every man praying or prophesying having anything on his head, right? The side of his head. So the anything, and the problem with the anything is in italics. We have to do our due diligence to understand italics. Whenever you see italics in the scripture, you got to understand something, right? So let me get some research right quick regarding italics, right? So this is italics, right? Or italicized words in the Bible are not part of the original Hebrew Aramaic text. They were added by the translators, right? So we see that the translators were adding words like that. Whenever you see, italics like that, it's added, to try to, get the understanding of certain, linguistic languages, to make it flow smoother. So anything was never in the original text of Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek. It was never in there, right? And also it makes no sense because if you say anything, in that perspective, then even the priests, even they couldn't even cover their heads, with the bonnets, the mitris, the turbans, the diadoms. So that makes no sense, right? So, we can, use the Geneva, in that instance right there, because of the italics. So, I pray that we proved what Paul was referring to in 1 Corinthians 11:4. He was not talking about, a band like that. He was talking about the entire hat that we read over in 2 Maccabees chapter 4. And I think it's 2 Maccabees chapter 4 and 12. Yeah, let's get it again. This is what Paul was addressing, because we were just so influenced, just like here in this wicked damn place. Trying to assimilate to all these damn wicked heathens. Right? Let's get it again. Right, so back to 2 Maccabees 4 and 12. It says, "For he built gladly a place of exercise under the tower himself, and brought the chief young men under his subjection, and made them wear hats." Right? So, this custom, spread like wildfire. And so this is what Paul was addressing. You know what I'm saying? And again, let me just make this is a sidebar, in terms of this wicked, this wicked garbage, 4th of July garbage day. You know what I'm saying? Just straight wicked. You know what I'm saying? To even still do this garbage like this. We ain't been liberated. Are you liberated, Israel? Don't pay your taxes. Don't pay your water bill. Right? Don't go to your job. See if you're liberated. Right? So I pray, that this presentation was edifying to understand exactly what Paul was referring to over in 1 Corinthians 11:4. Right? Once again, we're going to face to the east of our homeland of Jerusalem and give all glory, all honor, all praises to Yahweh, Ba'asham, Yahweh Shai, to the hopeful elect. Shalom, Israel.